Okay, so that's better. Thank you. So we're on business case number 23, which is the street-like local improvement business case. I've got lots of movers and seconders over here. I'll go to Councillor Salih and Councillor Lewis. Discussion on this one. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I circulated through the clerk earlier today an example of one area in my ward around Garland and Royal Crescent, where there's an elementary school where kids from the Clark Road Secondary School use walk to school routes to get to and from school, to home, after part-time jobs or after school sports and those kind of things, and you saw those pictures. Without streetlights, those roads are black. And those pictures were from November. You've seen the communication from the Argyle Community Association, and you've heard lots about the importance of taking action on the pillar in our strategic plan about building a safe city for women and girls. Well, this is one of those nuts and bolts municipal things that we can do to make our city safer for women and girls, for pedestrians, for people who are relying on transit to get to and from work and then have to overcome that last mile challenge of the bus stop to home. You know, we heard the young woman tonight, the university student, who talked about having to clutch her keys on her way home from the bus stop. I certainly have heard the same thing from representatives of the University Students' Council, how critically important they feel this is to community safety. So I'm hopeful that yes, this one too has a levy impact, but I think this is one of our core municipal services, is making sure that our basic infrastructure, and streetlights are part of that basic infrastructure, gets funded and we start closing some of those gaps. I have 18 streets in Ward 2 that don't have any streetlights. It's time we start to fix that. I know that when those subdivisions were built, you know, it was a different era planning wise, and we thought it was okay to not do those. I don't judge, you know, planners and councils of 30 and 40 and in some cases 50 years ago in those neighborhoods, but we've got a chance to start to close that gap with this business case, so I encourage you to support it.
Councillor Hillier.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'd like to echo Councillor Lewis's comments as well. I have over a dozen roads in my ward that without lights, 3 of them on a bus route with a high school and a public school. This is where we can start for the core. People in the audience today were complaining about this very thing, dark streets. We can step up. I think this is the time.
Councillor Squire.
This is a very easy one for me. I represent Western University, and they take huge steps to encourage safety. They have a foot patrol on campus. They really take care of each other, which is fantastic, and we've got to contribute to that. So this is a very easy one for me to support, and I've saved money out of my allocations to make sure I can do that.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Thank you. I didn't realize how many people had already put up their hands. I wouldn't have put up my hand if we were all going to be speaking highly of supporting this this business case. Personally, I know that I had a lot of conversation with staff to try and to understand the full impact of this business case, because I just wanted to make sure that we're not doing the wrong thing, or we're not leaving out the thing that we need to be supporting, because I had misunderstood it, and I had a lot of conversations with the students at the university, and I'm happy to support this business case. It's something that we have talked about a lot, even when we were campaigning. There's a lot of streets that don't have lighting, proper lighting, and the impact that it has on sharing this cost with the residents is actually the right thing to do for us. And yeah, sorry that I had to put up my hand as well.
Great, thank you. Councillor Salih.
I was happy to move the motion. I think it's always important to bring our gender lens when we're dealing with policies. I think this is one thing that we could do municipally. So I think I'll just sum up by saying, let's turn on the lights.
Okay, I have no other speakers, so if there are none, except Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I just wanted to recognize Councillor Van Holst. I was surprised that he didn't weigh in on this one, but years ago, he and I were talking about how can we get something going for warranted street-like program, right? Because the way things were being done the cost of doing it through local improvement was just too much for people, and no one was putting in the streetlights, and it just wasn't working. So we just had streets that were not lit, and then they were just gonna be not lit for a really long time. And I'm glad that we finally got to the point where we're gonna move ahead with the program. I think we have to keep a close eye on it to see if it actually works, because it's one thing to fund the program. I think the next thing and the more important thing is it actually helping to get more lit streets out there, and people participating, because I think the 60-40 is a reasonable place to start. But if it's not working, I think we're gonna have to look at, do we have to cover more of the cost? Do we have to promote it differently? How can we get people to actually participate in the program? Because even 40% of the cost is not insignificant. So I certainly support it. It's gonna respond to a need that's been expressed to me many times, including back in 2016 when an assault happened in my ward in an area that was unlit. And people at that time said, we need the city to put street lights in on these streets. And we're finally getting to the place where that's gonna be possible, and it's actually gonna move ahead. I'm glad, I know Councillor Van Holst spent a lot of time talking to staff about how to make that happen in the background, and I'm glad it's here before us.
Great. I have no other speakers, so I'm going to open this one for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
All right, so that's business case 23 complete. We're on to business case 24, Wi-Fi in recreation centers for the public. Councillor Lewis would like to move.
Actually, I do want to move, but I want to move the amended motion that was circulated to colleagues earlier this week, which amends the source of funding to the EEE fund and directs staff to develop an advertising and sponsorship program to use this as a revenue generator to repay the capital costs and then provide a new source of revenue to the city. Clerks have the wording for that, I believe.
Okay, we'll get that wording up on the screen. Is there a seconder for that, Councillor Pelosa? So with that moved and seconded, you'll see the wording on the screen in a moment. I'll start a speakers list. Councillor Turner.
Thanks. I appreciate the innovation sought through the motion here. I won't be supporting it for a couple of reasons. One, if we're taking a look at Wi-Fi programs, the Wi-Fi hotspot program was far more important to me than this one. And the second is that I really I have kind of an ethical issue with seeking private sector funding and advertising on city provided programs. So even when we use naming rights for things, I have some challenges with that. So for those two reasons, I'll be voting against this motion.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you. And I too will be voting against this motion. And to me, it's really about residents that I have in my ward that don't have infrastructure for internet as it exists. They have to pay more, and then they have that dial-up service. And until we get proper infrastructure for internet for all residents in London, I find it very difficult to support a program that you know, they may have to go to just to get Wi-Fi and go to the community centers. I don't think that's the way to do it. And I won't be supporting this.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, maybe if I could get my colleague who is moving this, if I don't really like voting against services that help people. It's not something that I like to do. It makes me very uncomfortable to vote against services that help people regardless of, you know, the priorities that they are in. So I like to propose to my colleague, if he's willing, to amend that we also include the Wi-Fi hotspot program that we did cut recently from the public library. And if I could have a seconder for that, and if he's okay with it, and include it, I'm happy to support this motion along with that. But if it stands alone, it's put him in an uncomfortable place of having to not support it when these are services that people need and for different reasons, and we cannot decide which class is where and what time people may need services. A service is there for people to use. And I do want to support this, but if it stands alone, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable to support it.
I'm just going to work out some logistics, but I'll go to the mover on this first.
Sure. So I appreciate where my colleague's trying to go on this. First of all, I think we would need reconsideration on a matter that we've already voted on to include that. And I actually, you know, respectfully want to remind colleagues that the library has been clear that the Wi-Fi hotspot program has not been cut. They have funding to run through 2020, and they will be looking for the same sort of opportunity, perhaps in a little different way, not through advertising, but through sponsorship to continue it. That said, one thing that I would offer to my colleague is that this may generate sufficient revenue that if the library does not find a funder by the end of the year, that we might be able to direct the funding generated from this to help support the library with its Wi-Fi hotspot funding needs. So in terms of where the revenue from this program goes, that would be something that, I mean, we would have to see how the model developed and what revenues were generated, but I think that this might actually provide a source to address that concern if there's a shortfall in future years.
So I just want to clarify, just so people know the logistics of the Wi-Fi hotspot case was a reduction business case that carried. So we would have to reconsider that to bring it back up, just so colleagues know. I'll go back to Councillor Kaibaga.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So, I mean, I do appreciate the thoughts and the more information that my colleague is sharing. I think that this would have to be a whole entire debate on whether or not we believe in privatization of public library services, and I'm not going to get into that. So for now, I think I will vote against this motion, and maybe we can have another discussion when we are ratifying our last votes in council.
Okay, sounds good. I'll go to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. So I'm not going to be supporting this. I have problems with it on a lot of different levels. I don't think it's a high priority, first of all. We're looking at the budget the way it is right now, and we have just a few business cases left to go over. I personally have not heard from any of my constituents who are looking for this this kind of funding. And again, I agree completely with Councillor Turner. If I'm going to pick some kind of service related to Wi-Fi, it definitely is the lending hotspot program that we chose to not fund. So I won't be supporting this. We keep hearing over and over again as well, every dollar counts. It doesn't matter how low, and it doesn't matter what creative sources of financing we're looking at. This is something that we do not need to move forward with right now.
I have Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. I'm prepared to support this for several reasons. Firstly, the ability to expand Wi-Fi into these particular facilities. And to me, it's just one more opportunity and a thoughtful opportunity, I think, to give people an option. How many people without Wi-Fi will go to their Starbucks closest to so they can hook up to and get their device connected? But here we've got some public facilities. It just makes some sense to me. And actually, I applaud the innovative way that Councillor Lewis is looking to help fund this. Look, we know we're in tough financial challenges with this budget. You know, we've said yes to an awful lot. We've been mindful about a few things. But, you know, ultimately, the taxpayer is going to pay for this. And if we can find ways where we can get support through other means, through business means, we do that now with the library. Look at the Wolf Performance Hall. That didn't happen by accident. Look at the Stevenson Hunt Rooms. I was approached by then the CEO of the library system at the time, and my firm put in $50,000. And I'm not saying that as anything except that it was an actual financial commitment that was made to support the library system and its development. And we were but two. The Wolf family and their foundation and my company at the time were but two examples of many sponsors, and there are many examples of public facilities that get sponsorship. So if we can find innovative ways to help people and provide advantage, I think that's tremendous. And if there's an overflow opportunity, and I might even suggest to the councillor that he might even amend his motion slightly, that if there's additional funds available, that might be used to extend the potential of the library hotspot being supported. But I leave that to you if that's a consideration. From my perspective, I think we need to find these innovative ways to provide programs, and public sponsorship is certainly something that we've done, and I say kudos to the councillor for putting it forward.
Councillor Lewis, Pelosa, and Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. So, first of all, I will say to Mayor Holder, I would ask you to give some thought because, and maybe Councillor Kayavaga wants to give that some thought as well, because expansion of the Wi-Fi hotspot would be a little different than, so certainly I would consider if there's surplus generated after the EE is repaid to provide funding for expansion, that would be different than the current program that's got funding from another source. Through you, Chair, to staff, though, I do want to ask, so colleagues are aware, how much did we generate in revenue for the city last year at our arenas for rink boards? And I know that Mr. Stafford is not here, so I'm not sure if Mr. McGonigal can answer that off the top of his head. I have the number, but I just want it shared.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I did send a text message about 30 seconds ago to get that answer. I figured that question was actually going to come based on the conversation, so I will have that for you shortly.
So I do have that because Mr. Kabinski provided it to me. It's $160,000 in revenue last year. Last year, $160,000 in revenue just from rink boards. So there's obviously an opportunity here to generate some revenue in advertising and sponsorship dollars that we could use for a variety of things. I hear how this is a tough budget. You know, we've moved funds from other areas because we've said, well, we'll run them as pilot projects. This is moving funds from a capital reserve fund actually to the EE where it would be repaid. And I did want to pick up on something, and I'm not, I don't want to sound as though I'm picking on anyone in particular, but through you, Chair, I would point out to Councillor Hopkins that Bostwick has free public Wi-Fi. So residents in that facility already enjoy this. It's just not something that is consistent across all of our facilities in the city. So I would say that in our older facilities, our residents deserve the same access, whether they're at Nichols or Argyle or Medway or the Aquatic Center, as folks enjoy at Bostwick and other facilities where it is already available, including in our library branches as well. So I'm just going to put it out there. I know that folks We'll have differences of opinion on things like naming rights and stuff. I appreciate where Councillor Turner's coming from in not thinking that those are a good way to generate public revenue. I respectfully disagree, but I appreciate where he sees that as a principled stand. I wouldn't expect him to change his mind on that because he's been consistent on that for a long time. But I think that this is an opportunity for a new revenue source that we could put to work for us. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, I have Councillors Pelosi, Cassidy, Helmer, Van Holst, Squire, and Hopkins. So I'll start with Pelosi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wanted to identify that the strategy for this is Wi-Fi in recreation facilities where there's a customer need. I've heard from residents at the, I believe it was the Kiwanis Senior Center towards downtown, that the Wi-Fi is only working proper in the front of the building, but if you have room bookings in the back, that it's not quite adequate for programming. In Ward 12, we have Earl Nichols Arena, we have a soccer field outside of it. Residents have reached out saying the closest library is Gelnet, White Oaks. Like, it's a long, the kids can't go that far, nor do I think they should have to be in the Tim Hortons. That's a new amenity for us. Out of that place, we have a community kitchen. There's Spectrum programs. There's summer camps. The soccer fields are in use. And that's where we tend to hold our community association meetings. And when we do them there, there's no access to Wi-Fi. Traditionally, I just shove everyone into my house, but that's not always possible. And like for certain sections of our community, that's the only space we have. Like, we just don't have anything else. If you're lucky enough to have a new build in your ward, good for you. Like, we don't all have that. And sometimes it's too far. We've talked about a lack of sidewalk connectivity, cycling structures and infrastructure. Like, we just can't always go where we're going, and it's just really hard for some of our communities. So my community has reached out. We're kind of this little island. I'm like, once we're south of Old South, but north of White Oaks, like, we're just stuck by major streets, and that's the only place we can get to. So my residents have reached out and asked, and this is something they believe they would use. We're hosting outdoor movie nights in that area too. And sometimes in the arena when the ice is out and it's a rainy day. Last year we actually hosted it in the arena, and I know some families would have loved to have shared pictures and done stuff. It's just they didn't have internet to be able to do it.
Councillor Cassidy.
So, Mr. Chair, just hypothetically, if this didn't pass a budget, could the councillor bring the request for a report from staff through the committee cycle about the sponsorship revenue generation? I'm just asking, it will most likely pass tonight. I can hear the comments, but hypothetically, could the councillor not go the other way, get the funding first, get the revenue stream going first, and then propose the Wi-Fi? And if so, what committee would that go through, their request for a report?
Okay, so I think the first one I have to go to our staff on the process, and then the committee, I'll just ask the clerks on. I don't know if you heard the question or not. Yeah, okay,
So,
go ahead.
Sorry, through the chair. What we do know is that we have some general industry standards as it relates to sponsorship and revenue rates. Those rates are often dictated by the number of hits, the number of clicks on the ads. That's not something we know at this point. We do know that it's possible that we could generate somewhere between 5 and 20,000 if we were at 20%, 25%, 50%, et cetera, in terms of uptake and hits. And that's all we know at this point based on preliminary industry standards and working with our sponsorship team.
And the committee, the clerk just said to me, would be the CAPS committee if that were to come through a committee process. So I'll go back to you, Councillor Cassidy.
So based on what I've just heard, it doesn't really sound like it would take a while to pay back. So it's not going to cover it. That's all.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I think this may be a situation where we're perhaps overthinking something that's pretty straightforward. I think the amendment that's come forward from Councillor Lewis around changing things, may be responsible for that, has introduced a little bit of, maybe added difficulty. I think financing it from the city facilities reserve fund is a perfectly appropriate source. And for something like this, where it's gonna be $155,000, I think all the added complexity of like, pay it out from Triple E and then pay that back over, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, we're gonna pay it back from the revenues. Like, that is not really worth doing. I would rather just pay it from the city services reserve fund. And then if there are revenues generated from sponsorship, use them in the arena system. Like, I don't know why we would have it kind of go flowing back to Triple E and all that. It's just a really long-term thing we'd have to keep an eye on, and I don't know that there's much value to be gained from changing the source of financing. So partly because it's a small amount, $150,000 across all the different places that's gonna go, I think is really a small capital investment. I do like the idea of looking for some sponsorship opportunities on those Wi-Fi hotspots. I think that's reasonable. It's not that dissimilar to what we just had happen with RBC Place London. It's just a smaller version of something very similar. So I think that's a reasonable idea. I'm not sure that it's going to generate huge amounts of revenue, and that's why I'm a little concerned about tying them together and then having a long payback period. So I would support the original suggestion, which is to finance it from the City Facilities Reserve Fund. I'm not going to support this one because I just think it's overly complicated. I do support the idea of having a report back about revenue generation, but I actually don't think that needs to happen in the budget process either. I think that could just be a motion that the councillor brought to a committee and we could have it go through that normal process. So if that doesn't go through here, I hope he'll do that. I'm concerned that it might, maybe it won't go through now and then we'd be stuck with a decided matter.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate Councillor Lewis for coming forth with this idea. I think it's great. When people go to our various facilities, they're going to log on. There's going to be a log on screen there. There could be an ad there. I think that's a valuable thing. Otherwise, it's just going to be some sort of graphic. A picture of me is not going to do us much. But the great thing about stuff like this is it makes things start to pay for themselves, and that's sort of the ultimate way we want to have things. If we can work every individual thing pays for itself, then we know we've got something sustainable, and this is getting us towards sustainability. I guess I want to ask through you, Mr. Chair, if this does fail, will that be a decided matter of council? In terms of pursuing a revenue generation on the ads?
If something failed at committee, it doesn't get approved at council, so it's not a decided matter of council. It just wouldn't make it through committee.
That's great. Okay. So thanks. I'm fine with however my colleagues vote. I'll support this because I think it's just a great idea. I hope when people speak, though, I was a little confused. People were saying, well, I'm not going to support this, and I'm not sure if you're against the Wi-Fi, so let me speak for that too. I think we definitely want Wi-Fi in as many of our public facilities as possible, and I think that's the first place we want to go. We might as well, rather than put Wi-Fi into individual homes on a very short-term basis, let's put it where many people can take advantage of it at the same time. And I think people expect it now. They expect to go to city places and find Wi-Fi. I know we didn't support the item for Smart City, but this is one Wi-Fi in our recreational facilities that one would expect from a smart city, so we can push that individually forward.
Councillor Squire.
I'm surprised that we've had a long discussion about this one. I think it's a rather obvious idea to start with Wi-Fi in all of our facilities. I really don't like the idea of connecting it to approval of something else, or because I don't have something else, we can't approve this. I don't want to get into that. In terms of it being a small item, yes, but I've done the way I've worked with the budget is, I knew what I wanted to support, and I knew what I had to give up to support what I wanted, and I've done that from the start to the finish of the budget. So I'm really enjoying the budget process. People say this is a difficult process, and no, it's if you it's a methodical, logical process, and here we are.
I'm going to try to take that as a compliment, but probably.
It has nothing to do with the chair of the budget.
I knew that was coming. Councillor Hopkins.
And thank you, and I too, Councillor Squire, am enjoying the budget process as well. I agree, it is about priorities, and for me, it's not about where the funding is or where it's going. And Councillor Lewis, I'm glad that you're not picking on anyone, but you did mention Boswick, and so I do think you deserve an explanation why I'm not supporting this business case. I'm not against Wi-Fi and community centers, whatever. But for the past couple years, there's this orphaned area in my ward that does not have infrastructure for proper internet service. We know the provincial government has introduced broadband throughout Ontario. And it's going to probably take a long time. There is this orphaned area that exists in the West End. It's not close to Boswick Community Centre. There's opportunities for internet service out in the county, to the south, to the north, and to the east. But along this area, there is a number of residents that have to that have difficulty paying for internet, and when they do, it costs the amount that they have to pay is exorbitant. It's almost 3 times what I pay for internet service. And then it's a dial-up service. And they've reached out to me, and we've worked with Rogers, Bow, through the city. This has been an ongoing conversation for a number of years. How do we get the infrastructure in place? And they've reached out to me to say, can you go to the city? Can we partner with the city to get this in there? And the answer tends to be, no, not yet. We'll wait, we'll see. We may get something in 5 to 10 years when lots of development comes in. But it's just a fundamental challenge for me to support Wi-Fi in our community centers while residents in my ward have difficulty getting proper internet service.
Thanks, colleagues. I have myself next on the list. Given we've got 62 minutes left, I'm just going to make some very brief comments from the chair, if that's okay. So, unless you want to switch. Okay. This is one that I'm going to support because I do have constituents who are giving me feedback on this, particularly at the Canada Games Aquatic Centre. In fact, there's one person who I know is watching right now who's going to message me as soon as the debate is done, because he's very persistent and he's just one of a number at that particular facility. And so I actually see this as a reasonable service improvement for folks who use our facilities, and there is some inequity to the facilities across the city, and the quicker we can close that gap, it's a very reasonable thing for public Wi-Fi to be available at city facilities. I think that's a reasonable goal for us to have. And I also have an area in my ward that has only dial-up connection. It's a very small area, but I think that the work of our associations and pushing other levels of government to support broadband access isn't just a thing for rural communities, but also impacts some areas of our cities as well. So, so I'm supportive of both those things, and I'll support this business case as well. I have Councillor Sedley on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could just get clarification, maybe through the mover or yourself. Part C, just to be clear, it's just directing staff to come back, and then at that point, it would require our council approval for the Part C, which is the sponsorship connection, correct?
I'll go to our staff on how they would operationalize C and the process that they would follow. It says to develop a plan, but I don't want to misinterpret. We certainly want to be clear about what your intention is on the process you'd follow and whether that plan would come back to council for approval.
Through the chair, that is correct. That is our understanding of C at the moment, and we're happy with the clarity on that.
Okay. Any other speakers on this? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Can you just do B and C separately?
I sure can.
Vote differently on them.
Yeah. Do you want B and C together and separate? Okay. So right now I'm going to divide it A and then B and C separate. If anybody wants it subdivided further, now's the time. Otherwise, I'm going to look to do it that way. Okay. So we'll do A first. Okay, A first. I assume the same mover and seconder are good with the motion components as divided? Yes? Okay. So this will be the motion for A, as you see it before you, which is the approval of the business case. So I'll open that for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed, 12-3.
Okay, and now B and C together. I don't see any further speakers, so I will open B and C together, same mover and seconder, for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed, 10-5.
Okay, that takes care of business case 24. Business case 25 is the business case related to the winter maintenance program support. Councillor Kaibaga, looking to move the whole thing? Okay. That's the whole thing's moved, seconded by Councillor Sali. Discussion on the winter maintenance program support. Councillor Lewis, and then Turner, and then Sali.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the mover and seconder for getting this on the floor. This is something that I campaigned on. It's something I've been a vocal advocate for. And now I find myself in the position at this point in the budget deliberations where even though I really, really want something, I'm willing to give something up. And so I'm going to let people have a bit of a discussion, but for me, the most important piece of this is doing a better job on our sidewalks. It's something I've heard from residents in my ward, in wards all over the city, that doing a better job of clearing our sidewalks so that pedestrians can get around is really what they'd like to see us do. And if to keep the tax levy a little bit lower means that we're going to keep the same standard on crescents and cul-de-sacs that we currently have, which are the provincial minimums, but we're going to make a better effort on sidewalks, then I'm okay with that. So when it comes to, you know, Councillor Hopkins has said a couple of times it's about priorities. Well, for me, the sidewalks are the priority in this business case. So I'll let colleagues continue the discussion on what they think is important in this, but for me, it's going to be the sidewalks one, and when the time comes, I'm going to look to maybe split these apart.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Councillor Lewis. I think the priority here is sidewalks. I'm not prepared to support expanded snow clearance on roadways, and I worry a little bit about the liability associated with exceeding the minimum maintenance standards. I think that's something we should be very cautious of. But with respect to sidewalks and mobility, accessibility, these are all really important things. Through you, Mr. Chair, if I might ask a question. part of the challenge is when we take a look at whether it's the 5 centimeter or the 8 centimeter standard, is the equipment that we use can't get to bare pavement. There's a number of reasons, if I were to understand. Part of it is just that concrete heaves, and having a plow blade that hits right down to the concrete level creates a fair amount of risk if that actually hits. Also creates some challenges to sod and adjacent grasses and things like that. Other municipalities have used large brushes. Just big rotating brushes, which can get it down to bare pavement, doesn't have that jamming effect, doesn't risk the sod interruption and impacts as well. So I'm concerned that the equipment we use doesn't really address the issue, and even if we were to go down to a 5 centimeter standard, we're still going to have, especially after something like recently where we have near freezing temperatures and a snowfall, you just end up getting a freeze of very uneven ice on the pavement instead. How have we explored that? What are the options available to us, and where do we go from here?
Through the chair, John Parsons is here to be able to help us out with a couple of those comments. He has had some experience and looked at some of the things that you just mentioned there, so I'll pass it to him.
I also think it was snowing outside when I looked out there, so Mr. Parsons, thanks for coming. Just one sec.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah,
thank you for having me. In regards to the brushes, yes, we have tried that in our downtown area. The bristle brush has to have at least 50% steel in it, and it does throw the snow quite far. It doesn't work so well, we found, when you have wet snow that sticks to the ground. We do find that it can still peel up some sod, and it's a lot slower operation. So you need more units out there in order for that to happen. So that's that question. Was there another question?
No, through you, Mr. Chair. No, that was the question, and just more why weren't we doing that, and what would be the impact of getting there? Because I think that gets us closer to bare pavement, which is, in terms of a mobility standard, probably our objective here.
That was a question, right, Councillor Turner?
I think the question was, if we were to do it, what would be the incremental cost associated with that? Because I think just even at the 5 centimeter standard, it doesn't get us to the objective of ensuring mobility and accessibility. It just gets us a few centimeters shorter.
That's correct. If just using the mechanical method like we use with plows, it will still have snowpack at the end of it. Brooms will work in certain cases. If we get a lot of heavy snow, they don't work so well. They are slower. I can't really project a cost right now, but we need a lot more units in order to keep up.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Salih.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments are really brief. I think it's important for us to make enhancements in this area. I know every time it snows, the phones are ringing and the emails are gone, and we ask a lot of our staff, especially in the snow removal area. They have to do a difficult job very early on in the mornings. So I just want to give them a shout out as well. Give a shout out to Councillor Helmer. I know who specifically with the sidewalks and some of the other tried to make some enhancements and work with him and a few others around who are still around this horseshoe last term, but we weren't as successful as we wanted to. So hopefully this time we'll be a little bit more successful. So I encourage you all to support this.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'll leave it to Councillor Slee to remind me of the 9-6 vote that slayed the improved sidewalk clearing last multi-year budget. I actually wanted to ask about a difference between this one and last time. Last time we were talking about the same kind of service improvement, and it was going for the bargain price of $300,000 per year. Now we're talking about $600,000 per year, and I suspect that the explanation is that the last episode was kind of low. I certainly wish we'd gone with it then, but I wonder, is there a more detailed explanation for the change in the costs?
Inflation.
Through the chair, I say that last time. The difference in the cost was I was probably low on my estimate before, and just the type of weather we were experiencing at the time. So when I came up with the costs on this one for $600,000, I was basing it on 6 more deployments, and it was just strictly based on our average snowfalls that we get. We were tracking the amount of snow we get at 5 centimeters, at 6 centimeters, 7, 8, to come up with different scenarios. And it looked like the difference was six more deployments, $100,000 per deployment, and that's where I came up with that number. And in addition to that, we would be out doing bus stops as well, because we'd be filling them in with the snow from the sidewalk, and that would be an additional cost for the LTC. So if this option is picked, you have to pick the LTC one as well at $140,000, which is again another 6 deployments on average.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, my level of regret for not getting the couple extra votes last time is increased. I appreciate the answer. I do think this one is really important, and I hope that there'll be lots of support for this particular service improvement. It may not cost us so much money, and I want to emphasize that, because it all depends on how many times we have to deploy and what the weather patterns are, and from year to year, there's going to be some variation in the requirements to send out the plow. But I think recognizing that the minimum to send out the plows is lower, I think sends a very good signal to people that we want those sidewalks to be as clear as possible. That we think people who are trying to get around on foot or rolling in a wheelchair or taking a walker, that they can get out and do the things they want to do in the city when there's snow out there. I think is really important in terms of people's ability to have a great quality of life in the city. I'm glad Councillor Turner is asking about the brushes, because I do think in areas where we have higher pedestrian activity, like there's a lot of people walking around, especially say in the core, I think we need to be looking at, maybe we do need to get some of those units out on the street and do a much better job of clearing the sidewalks that are being used very heavily. I'm not sure that we need them on every sidewalk in the entire city, but I do think that maybe this is the first step, which is lower the service threshold. The next step is probably to get some different units and different equipment to handle certain areas that are higher pedestrian activity. I'm thinking the Main Street commercial corridors, right along major transit routes. That can make a big difference for people in terms of how they get around. You certainly see the difference in the downtown, where snow clearing is done differently. Like there's private operators who are doing things and the sidewalks are clear. So I think this one is really important to me. I know it's really important to people in my ward. There's lots of people who are getting around without driving vehicles. And in the winter, this really narrows their scope of opportunity, the things that they can do in the city. They will stay inside because they just can't get around because of the snow that's impeding their movement. So I hope it'll be supported. I think this one in particular is important, especially compared to the residential streets part. Like I think we should drop that. I think that would be a nice improvement, but I don't think it's necessary. This one I do think is necessary. So I haven't heard too much from other people, but I'm willing to move an amendment to just drop that part, the residential streets part, to lower the cost, because I think it's not as high a priority.
So there's 2 ways to do it. Given the course of the discussion, I was actually moving in the direction of having the clerk divided into 2 separate votes, but you wanted to move an amendment just to drop that from the motion, which is the alternative. I'm good either way. I'm just trying to do it the most efficient way so that we don't have to have a big debate about amendments. So if you're comfortable with me just separating it so people can vote for one but not the other, I could continue that motion that we've got. If you want to proceed with the amendment, I'm happy to do that.
It sounds like you've already done the work. There's no reason to do something else. That's fine. Okay,
so we'll have it divided so people can vote for one but not the other. Or vote for both or neither. Every option will be available to you. Councillor Liu, no, I've got a speaker's list, so I'm just going to go through that. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. So I like Councillor Lewis's thinking. Now we're getting into some savvy budgeting, peeling off what we don't necessarily need and grabbing the things that are the greater priority. These were the 2 that I was hoping to support myself. Some of the challenges with the pack snow, our calls, of course, are people trying to push a stroller through it or take a wheelchair through even a few inches of snow. I guess balancing that out, if you're really slick to the sidewalk, it may be slipperier and if someone fell, they might be more likely to get hurt. So it is a challenging situation. The question I wanted to ask our staff through you, Mr. Chair, is just about the potential unintended consequences of saying plow at 5 centimeters when we get a large snow. That it mentioned in here that that might mean we have to go out a number of times during the same snowfall, and I don't want to see that that extra cost. Obviously, we want to plow it once, or I think that's the best approach to go. So perhaps I could ask for some clarification on those comments in here.
Sounds like a great operations question for.
Through the chair, even at 8 centimeters, we have that sometimes if we get a 15 or 20 centimeter snowfall. So we deploy our resources. We go through the system, and sometimes we have to loop back and do a portion thereof just to make sure that we're at that threshold. At 5 centimeters, you're certainly going to see 5 more deployments in areas where we only get 5 or 6 centimeters like we did on January 9th this year. We didn't go out with 7 centimeters of snow. So you would see an improvement. Now, however, when we're deploying our resources, there will be times that we will have to loop through the system, and most often will be to punch out the intersections and corners, because you can imagine that they're going to fill in. If we send the sidewalk plows out well in advance of the road plows, the intersections are going to fill in. Then we're going to have to go back and clear those. So we will get calls, and we generally do, even if at 8 centimeters and then we got 15 centimeters, you have to plow again. There's still that opportunity where we get the intersections are plugged and we have to go back. So it's not that we miss them, we just have to go back and do them again. That will happen, and factored a little bit of that into the cost.
Okay, thank you very much. And we can see, we know that you're doing your best. And I think people should realize we live in Canada, so this is the challenge. This is the challenges we face. But the sidewalks and the bus stops are something that many people have talked to me about. I know this is the portion that our students from Western were advocating very strongly for, because they rely on those, particularly the bus stops. So I think this is a great compromise, and would take a little bit off of, take a small amount of the sting out of the budget. So I'll be happy to support the second 2 items.
Okay, in case you're wondering if it's winter, on the speakers list I have Hopkins, Lehman, Squire, Cuyahoga, Holder, Morgan, Van Meerbergen, Plaza, Hillier, and Lewis. So I'll go to Hopkins next.
Just stand up and say it at the same time.
I'm glad to see everyone still laughing here at this time of the evening. So at first I wasn't going to support this business case on maintenance. And I'm glad to hear that we're having this conversation about dropping the residential roads. I think that's not a priority for me. Sidewalks, I guess, it's a little bit of a different conversation. And for me, it's more around the concerns of accessibility. And I do have a question to staff about, if we reduce the amount down to 5 centimeters, are we dealing with the ice that I think is now starting to become a concern on our sidewalks, which regardless if there's snow or ice on a sidewalk, it's still difficult to get around. But as our winters change, we see more of the fluctuation in our weather. And I found myself on numerous times trying to look for snow to walk on to make it safer, just at the side of the sidewalk, as opposed to being on that sidewalk, which was very, very icy. So I'd like to know a little bit more. Are we dealing with any of these ice factors through the changes that we're going to be making here?
Through the chair, yes. So we will have more icier conditions. Having snowpack on the sidewalk, some say that it can be safer, because there's an opportunity, if you get freezing rain or rain, it can absorb into the snow. you know, and then if it freezing rain, if it warms up, you can still have a bit of traction. But we do have a program in place where we do sand. When we get icy conditions, we will get out there and sand them.
I think that's really important, that it's just not clearing, it's doing a number of other things and maintaining those sidewalks that are really important. So that will still continue regardless.
Through the chair, yes, but again, we will experience some icy conditions, and it does take us time to get through. We have a 1,600-kilometer network, so when those icy conditions do pop up, it takes us 13 to 14 hours to get through the system, to sand it.
Okay, Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. While I recognize Councillor Van Hulst that we live in Canada, and we do, we will never have perfectly dry pavement 12 months of the year. However, this is a step in the right direction, I believe. I've heard from seniors in my ward that have expressed concern about being house-ridden because they can't get out on the sidewalks, and accessibility issues with people in you know, walkers or wheelchairs, etc. What I haven't heard tonight, and which I'll bring up, is an issue that I have in schools in my ward, as I imagine everyone else does, is a lot of traffic at pickup and drop off, and we are trying to encourage folks to either have their kids walk to school or drop them off within, you know, 5 kilometer or a few kilometers away to walk in the final leg. And I'm hoping this will address that as well. It will encourage more folks to feel their kids are safe walking to school, even during the winter time, to reduce that, the unsafe congestion that we see in front of our schools twice a day. So I will support this.
Councillor Squire.
What I need to get to is what the difference is going to be and what our sidewalks are going to look at. Because I listened very carefully to all the people who were here who wanted this improvement. And it was about wheelchair accessibility, walker accessibility. Mr. LaHaye, who I have a huge amount of respect for, is in a wheelchair. And so I guess I'm confused because this is a procedure that says, okay, we're gonna get out earlier. We're gonna get out and do the sidewalks at 5 centimeters instead of 8 centimeters. So I understand the benefit of getting started earlier. You don't get that build up to 8 centimeters. You're getting started earlier. But is the actual, when you're done doing the sidewalk with the plow on the sidewalks, is the condition or state of the sidewalk you have now plowed going to be any more accessible for a person in a wheelchair or in a walker than it was before? I hope you understand what I'm saying. Are you clearing the sidewalk in a way that's going to make it more accessible for a person in a wheelchair or in a walker? Because a lot of my colleagues are saying it's a step in the right direction. The direction I understood that people wanted was a sidewalk they could use for a wheelchair or a walker. So it's really important to me that if we're investing money, that we do what people were asking us to do, and I'm just not sure if we're doing that.
Through the chair, even going out at 5 centimeters, you're still going to have snowpack. I have heard from the population that say that, no, we expect bare pavement or right down to the sidewalk surface in order to improve conditions. This will not achieve that.
So this is my concern. I think we're thinking that we're solving the problem of accessibility on sidewalks, and we're not. We are not. The accessibility problem is still going to be there because the same amount of snowpack is still going to be on the sidewalk. And the plow's not going to come out when somebody calls who's in a wheelchair and says, look, there's still snowpack on the sidewalk. The answer is going to be, well, we've done it to provincial standards, but you should be happy because we did it quicker. Like, I think we have to be really careful that we're raising an expectation in people as to what they're going to get, and they're not going to get it. And it's clear to me that sidewalk, when you're going to get it cleared earlier, because they're starting earlier, but it's still going to be an accessibility problem. So when you get those phone calls from people saying, these sidewalks are the same as they were before you spent the money, I think I'm going to say, well, we didn't say we were going to make the sidewalks more accessible. We just said we were going to make them to the same level of accessibility quicker. So if you want to say we're taking a step in the right direction, I suppose you can, but I think we have to be really careful that we're not saying you can now be on our sidewalks and they're much more accessible, because I don't think that's the case.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I think that as I was listening to my colleagues speak, the one issue that I wanted to talk about hadn't been brought up until now was are we actually getting accessibility through this? And the answer that I was looking for has just been answered. And I also wanted to know why we're trying to not do the residential streets when we have heard, I could pull up a list of emails from so many people who are stuck in their homes, seniors who are stuck in their homes, people who are who have mobility issues, who are stuck in their homes. And a lot of streets in London don't have sidewalks. So if we're only going to do sidewalks, what happens to the people who don't have sidewalks in their streets? Are they also, because we're going to get emails again of people complaining that they've been stuck in their homes for 3 days. And that's a problem. It's been a problem for a long time and continues to be a problem. And if we're actually, like we said, if we're going to invest the money, why would we remove, how can we pick what's going to be accessible for some people, what's not going to be accessible for some other people? I think that we need to invest appropriately to this, and we need to find the right way to do this. If we're promising people that this is going to, they came here and we listened to them. We said we're going to support business cases that encourage accessibility issues. How can we say we're just doing what the province standards when we are not? We're going to be liable at the end of the day too. So someone just told me that one of the reasons why we're removing it was because we want to make sure that we don't get on the hook. We're not liable when people get hurt. We are going to still be liable for people when we invest so much money, so much taxpayers' money into something that's still going to be causing problems. So I don't even think this is the right direction to take, let alone having to remove the residential streets. I think that's a bad idea. I think it's a bad idea because we're only thinking sidewalks, because we're only thinking, downtown, or we're only thinking some streets. We're not thinking about the many streets in London, the many residents in London who don't have the sidewalks, who are stuck in their homes throughout the winter. And yes, we've had a great winter. Well, I wouldn't say great winter, but we haven't had a lot of snow. So maybe it's been much easier on our staff, but the environment is changing all the time, and we don't know where we're heading. And we know that London gets a lot of snowstorms all the time, and we need to solve this better. And I don't want to not support this to move forward, but I'm really hoping that we can find something better, something that's accessible, like we promised. We promised that we would do this. At least I promised that to my residents, that I wanted to do that. I wanted to make sure that if we're going to invest in snow removal, which is something that I campaign on as well, it was also going to be accessible. So when we're talking about, inclusion, this is how we can work towards inclusion.
Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. Councillor brings up an interesting point. So a question, if I can, through you to staff. Do we know the number of homes, apartments, high-rises with sidewalks versus those that don't? Approximately?
Through the chair, sorry, we don't have that just on top of mind, but as you're aware, like looking at, for example, the street lights, those same communities that were built out over time that didn't have streetlights are similar ones that don't have sidewalks. So there is a substantial portion of the city, but it's mostly in the older areas.
All right, so just a couple of questions on the Dundas Place, which we just made a big investment in. Does that require any different kind of snowplow requirements since the sidewalk is different than conventional?
Through the chair, we have equipment down there with a plastic blade because of we don't want to scratch up the pavers. In addition to that, we use a lot of salt downtown to clear that area.
So is it fair to say, though, that if the goal is to go from 8 centimeters to 5, and Councillor Squire's right, it makes it happen sooner, but if I have to trudge through snow, whether I'm walking or doing any other form of non-vehicle travel, 5 centimeters is better than 8. Is that a reasonable comment?
Through the chair, it all depends on the pedestrian walking through there. I know the provincial standards, they set it at 8 centimeters. There was probably a lot of thought that went into that threshold.
All right, well, I'm not trying to be silly when I mean, I think it's obvious to me that, at least to me, from a math standpoint, that 5 centimeters is better than 8 for any number of reasons. But question I've got is in terms of risk management. So we heard that in the last council did not approve any change in the sidewalk reduction before plowing. Do we have any stats on the slip and falls and incidents that the city would have had to deal with in terms of actual payouts during the last 4 years, the multi-year budget? I'm just trying to get the math, because it was 300,000 a year that we heard probably should have been 6, but now it's 6. I'm just trying to get a sense. I'm trying to, obviously any injury is a bad injury, but I'm trying to get a sense of cost benefit on this, which sounds horrible as I ask it, but do we have any numbers on that?
Mr. Card.
Mr. Chairman, we do have statistics. We present them to you every 6 months, and we don't compound them the way that would allow me to answer the mayor's question, Mr. Chairman. I can find out how many claims we received over the last 4 years for slips and falls on sidewalks, but they're not broken down by snow as opposed to leaves or other factors, and trips over uneven sidewalk surfaces. There's one thing I should say, and that is that the Municipal Act talks about municipal liability and says that a municipality is not liable for injuries sustained by people using sidewalks as a result of snow and ice in the absence of gross negligence. So, I mean, the standard is something that is determined on the basis of what's reasonable. And as Mr. Parsons has said, the ministry thinks that 8 centimeters is a reasonable time to send out the plows. But gross negligence really means that you're not adhering to the standards that you've adopted, whatever those are.
So not to belabor that, but I think that's an interesting point now. So I'll forget your pun when you said that your statistics were not broken down, because this is all about broken legs and whatever happens as a result of someone falling. But I think there are some safety issues as well associated with this, and I'm inclined to want to support certainly the sidewalks. Now, can I just ask a practical question about the bus stops? Are we talking about the sidewalks around the bus stops, or are we talking about the, say, bus bays and the like that are at those bus stops?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, the standard for the bus stop clearing is once the sidewalks are complete, the equipment moves to clearing bus stops. So we would want to do that activity right after we do the sidewalks, because when we do the sidewalk, we'll be putting windrows of snow in those areas. So it does include the bus pad and areas where you get on the bus.
That's interesting, because I'm sure Councillor Squire has heard this many times. I had representatives of the Western's University Students' Council in my office, and their issue about snow removal around bus stops was important to them. And if the risk management issue doesn't seem to be the concern here, I could certainly see supporting the sidewalks and the bus stops as well. Thank you.
Okay, I have myself next, but I'm just going to throw myself later on the list so I can keep going. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Well, it seems certainly with regard to sidewalks that the issue really is ice. The snow itself is a lot safer when it's just snow. But clearly, the ice can be really problematic. And I'm sure in most of our areas, in fact, probably all of them, we see people walking on the roads rather than the sidewalk many times because the sidewalks are so icy. Or they're walking through the snow on people's front lawns next to the sidewalk. So then the objective then is how do we get or mitigate this ice problem? Because clearly if we go down to 5 centimeters, we're still gonna have ice. So my question then to Mr. Parsons is, through the chair, are we using salt on sidewalks?
Through the chair, no. We're putting sand down, and the sand is for traction on the ice. It is, like I was saying earlier, it's a slow operation. The sidewalk plows can only carry a yard of sand, so we have to have crews that follow those units around and fill them up. So it does take a long time to get through the system with the current number of units that we have.
It seems that salt would be much more effective to put the salt down and at least try to get down to the concrete. You'd have much more effectiveness with that than with sand. Is salt something we can look at putting on sidewalks?
Through the chair, it is something we have looked at. Salt is good to about -10, and then it will refreeze. So what can happen if you plow the sidewalk off and then you follow up with salting, you can get a scenario where then that melt water refreezes. After -10, then you'd want to use a different product like magnesium chloride, more expensive product, and we'd have to have a facility to hold something like that. Most municipalities that I'm aware of are using sand, and using sand just for attraction.
Because quite often we'll get a melt and then it freezes, and that's when it becomes dangerous. And that's usually around, it goes from -2 to +1, certainly like the type of winter we've had, that seems to be, so salt would be effective probably 90% of the time in a winter like this. I'm just wondering, for the price we're looking at for sidewalks, can we get salt included in that, or for a slightly bit more?
Through the chair, I don't have those numbers. I know it would be more expensive. Salt is more expensive than sand. I don't have that calculation off the top of my head.
Is it possible perhaps to put an amendment that staff investigate the use of salt on sidewalks?
Well, I would say, given that we're asking for the budget and the business case that was before us, which that wasn't included in, to investigate that's something that could be taken through the Civic Works Committee and have staff report back to that committee on the potential change in the use of, materials on sidewalks. I think that would be the more appropriate spot than the budget process. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Pelosa.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just thank you. Always enjoying the conversation and a night with friends. Thank you to Mr. Parsons. We've had emails back and forth as residents had also wrote me about the sidewalk sweepers. They were hoping to eliminate some of the sod damage that we're seeing. Mr. Parsons said that could amount to about $25,000 a year. Though a lot of residents just fix it themselves, which is always appreciated. A point of note is another issue with the sweepers is they do throw the snow farther, and especially in downtown areas, you always have to be mindful of the pedestrians in that area and stationary objects as well, and they don't work as well with the deep snow and the slushy snow, so it's a very special kind of snow that they prefer to work with. It seems that we're gonna be having a further conversation again through civics for my colleagues. Strangely enough, the July winter maintenance report that came through Civic Works was very informative of what we're doing, the cost of things, how the LTC bus stops are going, and if we move forward with this change, right now, the bus stops are the responsibility of the LTC. LTC contracts the city to maintain the bus stops based on council's approved standard, and then we bill back to the LTC the associated costs. Two-part question. One, our sidewalk plow contract expires in April 2021. Would anything that we're doing here have an impact on that, or would the city just negotiate more? How would that work if we needed the extra 6 units coming out?
Through the chair, yes, the contract expires at the end of March 2021. So the idea would be to, in the new contract, we'd put those parameters in place where they would have to have certainly the type of equipment we want, but be able to be resourced to go out 6 more times. I'm not sure, like right now they're used to 8 centimeters, they're used to that, probably only going out 7 times. They're resourced that way. It wouldn't be until I put a new contract in place where I can explain the changes to give them a fair opportunity to bid accordingly.
And one further question, just also in that report, and in an email to me, you were saying that we try and promote the Be a Good Neighbor program. I know when I'm out walking the dog or the children to the bus stop, I stop and thank the neighbors who've taken the extra time to plow their sidewalks to make it more accessible for us. Residents have wrote me and asked, can London be like other cities where you're just responsible for shoveling your own, recognizing some residents don't have that capability? Absolutely not everyone's capable of. What could we do though, recognizing that you can always get to your front sidewalk faster than the city could ever get there, and what we could do to promote that? Either, like, what could we do?
Through the chair, yes, we do have a program. Our communications folks have been working really hard on that to be a good neighbor. I know last snow event, we were tweeting out some information about if you're out shoveling your driveway, help out your neighbor and clear the sidewalk. And we had some responses back. Some people were saying, yeah, I did 2 or 3, or I shoveled the sidewalk in front of my house. It makes a huge difference. We are seeing and encourage through media opportunities to, if you're out snow blowing your driveway, do the sidewalk as well. We are seeing some people do that, and there's some good uptake. Probably more so in the last few years, we've noticed that. So that's why we've jumped on board, like many other municipalities have, is to encourage that activity, encourage people to get out and shovel the sidewalk. There's nothing better than a shovel to get that right down to bare concrete, and we're seeing in some of the neighborhoods.
Okay, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really do hear what Councillor Squire said, what Councillor Kayavaga said about, this is not going to get us to full accessibility. It's not. I had a great conversation with Mr. Leahy actually after his presentation here at the first PPM for this budget, when he talked about the petition with the 1,800 signatures. And we chatted, and we continue to communicate through social media. In fact, I guarantee he's watching this debate right now on the live stream. He knows that this isn't going to get us down to bare pavement, but from my conversations with him, he agrees that this is a step in the right direction, because we will not have the pile up at the bus stops as much as we have right now. We will have, as Councillor Lehman pointed out, lower thresholds in terms of schools, and most schools are pretty accessible by sidewalk. Most of the schools in our city were actually built to be walking schools, and they've often become not walking schools since they were built, but they were built to be walking schools, and we've heard from, the Middlesex London Health Unit, the London Police Services, the school boards, everybody's trying to get safe and active routes to school, to encourage kids to get back to walking to school. I think this will help in the winter months. I'm very intrigued by this sweeper technology that's out there too, and the newer ones that I've seen seem to handle things a little bit better, but they're still not perfect. And the heavier, wetter snow, I do understand is absolutely a problem. I hope that if we do go ahead and roll this out, that there will be at least some discussion in the future about perhaps bringing on a couple of more sweepers into the fleet and looking at how we can improve certain sidewalks in targeted areas even closer. Yeah, they're Councillor Kaibag is right, there's lots of streets in the city without sidewalks. I've got quite a few in my ward. And I know that this isn't the perfect solution, but I think it is a step forward. And I think what we're looking at right now is a balance between cost and care. And I think that we're taking a step in the right direction. If we move to this method on sidewalks, it's not gonna solve the problem, but it will make it a little bit better. As far as, you know, the salt and the melt and those things, I look forward to having that conversation at Civic Works. But I think taking this step, imperfect step, but one step forward is better than standing still. And I think that's what we do with this. We're not getting across the finish line. We're not achieving the perfect solution, but we are getting a step closer towards the goal. And while it's not going to solve Mr. LaHaye's challenges with getting stuck in a wheelchair, for folks who are maybe using a walker or a cane, this will help. For people who are trying to get off the bus with, you know, bags of groceries or whatever, and then trying to get over a snow mound, this will help. So it's imperfect, but nonetheless, I think it's important that we take some action. Through you, Mr. Chair, I did want to ask our staff if, through the modeling, if they could show us the difference in the tax rate if we just do the sidewalks versus doing the whole plan, because I know that the graph we've been seeing is if we go ahead and do everything. So I'd like to see if they could show us what it is if we only do sidewalks as opposed to side streets.
Heads up on that. It was noted that we have to do sidewalks and bus stops together because the sidewalks plowed into the bus stops. So we're really talking about the delineation that we have in the two motions. And so the councillor wants to see us approve just the 2.22 million for business case 25 for sidewalks and bus stops.
Through the chair, so just approving the sidewalks and bus stops component only would reduce the average annual increase by approximately 0.02%. So fairly limited.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna continue on the list then. All right, I have Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I just had a question for Mr. Parsons through the chair. It's noted in the business case that for the major streets and the arterials, you know, it might be 70 or 90 deployments, you know, on those days, number of days. In terms of the residential streets, the service improvement, it says that there might be 2 more deployments. What's the average number of deployments? I'm trying to understand what the delta is. Is it going from 10 to 12, or is it going from 20 to 22, or, you know, do you have some sense that could guide us on that?
Through the chair, I have that number here somewhere. Okay, it's not right at my fingertips, but on the 10 centimeters, greater than 10 centimeters snow, it's about 6 times that we're out with our full deployment of road plows on local streets.
So I think it's helpful to to put it into perspective. So the difference in terms of what people will see in the real world is right now, under the way the service model is, we plow the sidewalks 7 times a year. If we change it, we're gonna plow them 13 times a year. And so all the times when it's 5 centimeters of accumulation, or 6 centimeters accumulation, or 7 centimeters accumulation, there's gonna be a plow going through instead of nothing. Right, because if it didn't hit 8, nothing happened. And nothing does happen now. So I think actually it'll be a substantial improvement in terms of what the sidewalks will look like. It won't mean paired pavement, but it's gonna be a lot better than it is now. Because we're gonna be doubling essentially the number of times we put out sidewalk plows in the entire sidewalk network, which is, you know, 1,500 kilometers of sidewalk. That's pretty great value for money as far as I'm concerned. for the road network, and this is the reason it's not such a priority for me. So we're sending them out right now only 6 times. So they're not going out very often right now. Similar to the sidewalk. If we were to add $500,000 of expenditure, we only send them out 2 more times, which is really not a lot of gain. It's because we're sending much more expensive equipment, right? This is not like sending a little sidewalk plow. It's like sending a big piece of equipment. So I just don't think the value is there for right now, given the budget constraints that we've got. I think the sidewalks, that's going to be a major improvement in terms of the service. It's better value for money. So I support it. I don't think that the service improvement on the residential streets is as necessary. Because if you're rolling out in a car and you're rolling onto snow, I mean, that's not that bad. If you're walking around and you have trouble navigating the sidewalks, that's a big problem. So I think that's why I'm prioritizing it the way that I am. I can understand why other people want to do the whole thing, because it certainly would be a service improvement.
Okay, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I forgot if I had even put my hand up. I knew I wanted to.
Oh, everybody had their hand up, so don't worry.
So I understand what Councillor Kayabaga is pushing for. It's not doing the neighborhood streets for cars. It's doing the neighborhood streets in areas that don't have sidewalks for people that are in wheelchairs or walking. So I know that we asked staff how many streets don't have sidewalks, and we don't have the information available, but I'm wondering a different question, might not have it. How many streets are on the list for our warranted sidewalk program waiting to get a sidewalk? Do you have a rough idea? I'm looking at Mr. Mather's face. Do you have a rough idea on that?
Through the chair, sir, I don't have a rough idea of that at this time, but as stated, there would be definitely a backlog for that list.
Right. So as we start to move down that list and streets that are waiting for sidewalks get sidewalks, those sidewalks will eventually be plowed. But I still think that doesn't solve the problem of cul-de-sacs, because I don't think many of, if any of them, are on the warranted sidewalk list. So I hear that. I hear that argument, and I agree that we need to do something. We need to figure out something for those areas where there are no sidewalks. And so that makes the accessibility even worse, because even if we were not improving the standard of the sidewalks, it's still a better standard than an area with no sidewalks at all. I agree with Councillor Lewis. This isn't perfect. It's not a perfect plan, but that doesn't mean you do nothing. It's the last term of council there. Cliches were used a lot, but this one that I'm about to say definitely applies here, and that's perfect is the enemy of good. So Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer made a lot of points too that I was going to make, and that is the fact that it's not down to bare pavement doesn't mean it's not an improvement, because you're not waiting as long. So somebody might be waiting inside their house, waiting to go out onto the sidewalk, walk to the bus or something. They're not waiting as long now. There's a plow going to go out at 5 centimeters instead of 8. And as Deputy Mayor Helmer pointed out very succinctly, it wouldn't be going out at all if it never reached 8. So I think it is definitely an improvement. I am one of the 6, I believe, I didn't know the vote was that far apart, that supported this way back when. I was one of the Frozen 5. And I'm really happy to see this coming forward again, and I'm definitely in support of this. It doesn't mean we shouldn't always keep looking for ways to do better. We should always continually looking for ways to improve this, but this is a step in the right direction, and I think we need to take it.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you, through your chair. I think I had a question for staff, and I wanted to know if we have considered improving the cycling routes, snow removal as well in this, and if we also considered the TVP as well.
Through the chair, could you mind repeating that? Sorry.
It's okay. It's a long night. I just wanted to know if we considered the snow removal improvements for cycling routes and the TVP as well for this plan, if it's going to be included or not.
Through the chair, it's not in this budget. There are standards for cycling lanes on road, and that's part of the minimum maintenance standards. The TVP, that's something that was added at last budget, I think.
So just to jump in there through the chair, the TVP comes out of the Parks and Recreation side. We do the entirety of the TVP. We also do major parks and connections to schools in partnership with the school board. I'll look to Mr. McPherson, who is up hiding, looking for the thresholds on the TVP.
I'm glad I stayed. Through the chair, yeah, we do plow the Thames Valley Parkway. We use the same standards as the sidewalks that you're discussing now across the park system, so the contractor gets the same call out to go to the parks at the same level. Changing that is not part of this current discussion, though.
Okay. Councillor Squire.
I'm still not sure about this. I think it will make, I understand exactly what the improvement will be. We're getting it done quicker, we're doing it more frequently. It's not going to be at those higher levels, but my challenge is that it's still, when it's done, is going to be the same as it was before. And is this an investment we want to make to get there? The other thing I keep hearing is people saying, we're headed in the right direction. We're headed in the right direction. Well, when people say that, I really want to know, well, what's your destination? You got a direction, so is your destination bare pavement? Is your destination something else? Because I think when people say, this is a step in the right direction, they don't want you to stop. They expect you to keep going somewhere else, and I think that's bare pavement for a lot of people. The other thing that we'll never tackle, that I'm gonna say, is, you know, we will never tackle, I think, in this city, the idea of people clearing the sidewalks in front of their own houses and being required to, when they're able-bodied and able to do it. And we're an unusual city in that we don't require that. But that would be something if we really wanted to get serious about what we're doing. First of all, I don't think we would sit here talking about directions all night. I think we'd talk about where are we ultimately going to go. But I get why it's going to make people happier. But I still think we're not getting anywhere near where people actually want us to go.
Okay, that exhausts the speakers list. And what I've done is I've divided this into two separate motions. You can see that if you click current item on your screen. So the first motion, I kept the same movers and seconders. I assume they were okay with that. What we have in the first motion is the motion to approve the residential streets, just the residential streets portion of business case 25 in the amount of $2 million. So that's moved and seconded. There's no further debate. That is the one we're going to vote on now, is the residential streets portion only, because this is going to be divided into two parts. So I'm going to open that for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion's lost, 3-12.
Okay, and the next piece is the portion that includes sidewalks, the improvements of the threshold to sidewalks and bus stops together in the amount of $2.222 million. So I'm going to open that for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-1.
Okay, colleagues, it is 10:01. We got through a bunch of business cases together, 12 hours and 30 minutes later from when we started. I think we made a lot of progress today. I do want to say thank you to everybody for sticking it out for a long day, and especially our staff and the team supporting our staff. I know it's a very long day. I know we have to pick it up again tomorrow at 9:30, so we appreciate the dedication during this time. Just so colleagues know, the order of operations tomorrow, what we have left, based on all of the referrals of things to later in the budget process, what I have, and I've just conferred with the clerks, is we have the three components of the Back to the River. We have Dearness, then we have Fanshawe, then we have Land Ambulance, and then we have Infrastructure Gap business case. Those are the items that we have, and I'm going to proceed with them in that order tomorrow, just so staff know which way we're going. I'll also say tomorrow is not just budget day, but also the day that we do the most weddings at City Hall. So there's 10 of them. So if you get bored with the budget process, maybe observe a wedding. If you want to get married too, there's probably some slots open. So that's it. Thank you again for This is what happens after 12 and a half hours. Things get whispered in my ears, I just say out loud. I'm going to ask for a motion to recess until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Deputy Mayor Helmer, Councillor Van Meerbergen, all those in favor? Okay, that carries. We're recessed. Thank you.